Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and welcome to the Intersecting Margins, a podcast by South Asia Research Institute for Minorities, where we amplify voices at the intersection of caste, gender, and media representation. I'm Furqan Ahmed, and at SARIM, in each episode, we engage in thought-provoking conversations with change makers, and I'm glad to have one of those with us today, who are reshaping narratives and advocating for equity. Today, we are absolutely honored to have Aishwarya Raj with us, who is an independent multimedia journalist, writer, educator, and artist whose work uh, designed in a way that dismantles systematic barriers through advocacy, journalism, and data-driven storytelling. At a very young age, she had achieved so many things, so many accolades, like the UNFPA Largely Media Awards, and made contributions to major platforms like Outlook, Ecoin, and MOOC Nayak. Aishwarya's work is a testimony to the power of narrative and data-driven and social change in driving social change. Apart from her conventional work or whatever she's engaged with, she's also deeply engaged in curriculum development, working on a transformative class 10 textbooks, which is amazing, which is aiming at combating child sex abuse and is also a fostering collective reading culture through Mere Ekant Ka Pravesh Dwar. Let me just do a bit of translation. So it's in Hindi. It says that a gateway towards my loneliness, right? If I am not mistaken.
Solitude, rather.
Solitude. Yeah. So their work doesn't just report on inequities, it also challenges and redefines them. As we discussed, we will explore the intersection of caste, gender, and media representation in South Asia, the role of storytelling in advocacy and evolving landscape of digital activism. Aishwarya, thank you so much. You're joining us for the first time, and I must say I'm grateful to her show for connecting you with us. It was so refreshing to have some discussions, prior discussions with you, and looking forward for a wonderful discussion. I also, before I hand over the mic to you, I would be requesting you to, since we've gone through the questions and all, right, I would be requesting you to walk us through about what is Largely Media Awards. I did a bit of research on that, but I would want our audience to, our listeners to acclimatize about the initiative that UNFP is doing. So, reflecting on your path, could you share a transformative moment that ignited your passion for storytelling and advocacy, and explain how this experience continues to guide your approach to tackling complex social issues? The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Furqan. So, thank you for having me. So, I'll just first quickly talk about the first Ladli that I got, and how did I know about what is Ladli Media, and hence we will talk about what is Ladli Media actually for the listeners that are here or the audience that are here. So basically, I started working at a very at a time when I was not very well equipped with how this profession of journalism works, not in the sense of storytelling, but in the sense of how the awards are designed, how the fellowships are designed, how does one work in, say, the mainstream journalism, or how the independent journalism is different from mainstream journalism. What are the challenges of working independently? So I was very naive to say all of these real world aspects of journalism when I first started, because I'm not an institutional media student. So my institutional training or my academic training is in philosophy. So I was doing my graduation in philosophy when I learned of this internship that was being offered by feminist media organization that is based in India. And there was a very naive urge to just talk about or just report the things that is happening around me, because when you are doing philosophy, when you're a student of philosophy, there are lots of questions, concepts, empirical data that you are observing and questioning and engaging with. So that is how I started, and I was not very much aware of how Ladli Media works, what is UNFPA's initiative in giving out this award, that is basically to honor or to focus on the work of people who across professions that are working on the lines of creating gender sensitive knowledge, content, videos, reports, etc. So basically Ladli Media is not just for the journalist, it is also for the teams, the creative teams that make advertisements, that in some way talks about how gender or gender bias or misogyny, from personal narrative to family setup to institution, exists in our day-to-day lives. So that is one thing. Ladli Media is also given to the writers, Hindi and English both, until now, as of I'm aware. I guess it extends to, or it will extend to other languages as well. So it is mostly to do with the different kinds of patriarchies, the different aspects of patriarchies that are being highlighted, questioned, and challenged through the different works. And it necessarily does not have to be given to a female assigned at birth or a woman who is working towards gender sensitivity. It could be anyone, but mostly if we look at the data of Ladli Media, most of the people are female assigned at birth. So when I got my first Ladli Media, I was not very aware of how prestigious this award is, or how Ladli helps people in through their fellowships also to bring out the stories of that has to do with the issues around gender. And it was my first national award. So the first time I was awarded Ladli was itself a national award, and it was a report. It was an analysis kind of report. It was not a ground report, but it was more of analyzing the data, talking on the concept, the history of how there is a orgasm gap when we talk about the cis heterosexual male bodies and cis heterosexual female bodies, and why these persist. What is the role of different kinds of capitalist interventions when we talk about the pleasure, in the sense of cis heterosexual bodies of men and women, or male or female in that sense. So yeah, so that was my work that was awarded Ladli, and then there were a few more Ladlis after that. So it was nice. Ladli Media, so there's an organization called Population Fund that is based in Mumbai. So UNFPA ties up with Population Fund to bring out this annual award of Ladli Media Award for gender sensitive writings. Yeah, so in short, that is about Ladli and my on and off engagement with Ladli until now.
Thank you so much for walking us through your journey and how you get interacted with Latvian Media Awards initiative. I mean, since we talk about UNFPA, I must say that I also had the honor of working with projects which entailed gender-sensitive writing. Since I worked in media development organizations, apart from what I'm doing right now, so I know that it's a really good initiative to incubate not only journalists but people who have vision to do something for their community. Like, I call them the success stories. I'm sure it must have been an inspiring journey for you and your colleagues to come as well. So thank you so much for walking us through that journey. As you talk about when I was also exploring largely media awards, let's say archives video, and I saw the most famous advertisement. I was आपके घर पे बेटी हुई है, which featured Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, so it's a huge initiative. So I mean, kudos to you for what you've achieved so far. Your career blends investigative storytelling. It is uniquely dividend basically. With proactive changes, could you describe an instance where this is where the storytelling, the success storytelling part would be coming? Where could you tell us the instances where your innovative approach not only uncovered systematic issues but also sparked measurable reform? And how might this framework inspire similar initiative elsewhere in South Asia and beyond as well?
So I think when we there's one very universal question that I often have as a storyteller, that I had as a storyteller and as a journalist, not as somebody who also works in advocacy and as educator. So when I started writing, one frequent question that I had was, so basically there are many, not many, but of course a considerable number of journalists that are writing reports, doing ground reporting, bringing out very important stories that has to be there, that has to exist in the knowledge system of journalism. But not every story receives that kind of public attention, or B, the attention from the state, especially when it comes to working on the policy, remodeling a policy, and working on the implementation. Because what I believe is that the different government bodies, think tanks, and the organizations already, in somewhat sense, have a kind of idea of what is happening in terms of policy and implementation. So then the question arises that as a journalist or as a storyteller, in our individual capacity, what is that we can offer apart from bringing out the investigative stories that we are bringing, first and foremost, for the audience and readers? And I have struggled with this question for a while, and that is how I moved towards the advocacy part of it. So what I understood is that when we go to the ground as journalists, not every report that we are doing is a report that very much aligns with the communities or the identities that we carry. For example, if I am working on a Narega story and how the Narega scheme is faltering in Bihar, there are many respondents or people that I have interviewed are, say, from my geographical location or say from my caste-based community. But then there are many women or many people who are Narega laborers who are not. So now the point is, as a storyteller, as a journalist, how do we make our journalistic process a process that is non-hierarchical, a process that is non-extractive? Because most often, that is also my observation of the fellow journalists who are on the ground, because we go there in search of stories. So what happens is that the storyteller part, or the part where we are imagining a story and we want to put it in a certain way, we want to write it in a certain way, that overtakes the ethics that a journalist should have as a person while interacting with the people that we are interacting with for a report or for a ground reporting in that sense. So the first thing that I started working on was to make the whole process very non-extractive, to treat the people that I'm interviewing as equal participants in this whole process of reporting, and to also negotiate with the organization that I'm working for a small amount of honorarium, maybe, because I'm an independent journalist. So I don't have like a full paying job through journalism, but I try to negotiate for honorarium for the people that I am working with or reporting, because we often treat them as quote unquote subjects. That is what we call them, even sometimes in academia, and likewise in journalism. So that is one thing. When we talk about journalism and investigative stories and change, if we are focusing on the word change, it should start from the process that we are taking while we are going on the ground itself. That is one thing. Second thing, if we are talking about change, is that, so for example, if I am speaking to a group of people who are, say, victims of gendered based violence within marriage or outside of marriage, or it is a case of, say, child sexual abuse and one is reporting on that. So as a journalist, should also be hands-on with the resources that of government institutes and non-government organizations also, that could intervene as immediate relief providers. Like, for example, if I know an NGO or if an organization that is working on a certain issue in the local level, I can also connect that affected person or that survivor in that case to this particular organization who's working for the cause. So when I leave that place as a journalist, then I am not just leaving with a story, because my idea is not just to extract a story from the situation that I am in, but it is also to connect the survivor of whatever systemic issue that they have survived to an organization that is working for that cause. And there are many stories that I have not published, only in this ethical dilemma. For example, there was a survivor of acid attack. She had many burns, and the amount of damage to her physical body was also very huge. Although she had survived that attack, but she was working in some other state. She was from Odisha, but she was working from in Uttar Pradesh, and she wanted to take major action towards this person who did this kind of violence towards her. Now, this person was arrested by the police, but the status of the case is that it's pending in the court since long. There is no justice served to this girl who is the affected person here. And she does not go back to her village because she is scared that if she goes back to Odisha and to her village, because this person who is the perpetrator is a local and lives in the neighborhood, might try to do it again with her. Like if he's in jail, then maybe his family members might try to repeat the same offense towards her. And while reporting that story, I did not know how to tell this story when I know that the person who is behind this story herself is on a suffering edge. So instead, I tried reaching out to the lawyers, some of the friends that are lawyers, some of the acquaintances that are lawyers who are maybe working in Orissa, to maybe connect this survivor to the right person, and maybe to hasten their process, the institutional judicial process that is going on, or to maybe understand where that judicial process has went. So I think that is the second thing that personally a journalist can do. I totally understand that a journalist has lots of stories to do, and one cannot keep a track of everything that is happening with the stories that they have touched, done, or reported. But I believe that as a human, we also witness those stories, and in some sense, it affects us. So we can maybe use our own resources, our own social networks, to help the victims, to help them reach out to the organizations that can do a mundane intervention. The bigger intervention would come later, but the smaller intervention, the mundane life interventions, are also very important in terms of the mental, physical health, and to get out of that situation immediately, especially when it comes to the gendered violence. The third is how the change can be looked at in terms of the state. Now, that totally depends on what kind of visibility is being offered to the reports that we have done. Because as journalists, when we do our work, how much impact it brings also depends on how many readers it is reaching. What is the response of the state? What is the response of the different institutions? Are the people who are holding good intentions also able to read our reports on that? Because we understand that all kinds of people have all kinds of work. So that is also very important. So if we talk about immediate change in terms of policy, I think it is a very slow process and a very long process for a journalist, because we have stories, we use the data, we point out what is the lack in a policy, how can the implementation be brought to a pace where it is actually beneficial to everyone involved. So the only thing that I can think of is that one can keep working. One can keep working on how these policies and implementations are there, and one can more maybe focus on the personal potential that we have, and keep on hoping that maybe a policymaker or somebody who is reading our report gets something out of our report and uses that in the implementation and the policy making that they do.
Thank you so much, Aishwarya, for for comprehensively giving us the insight on this the art of investigative storytelling. Since you told you never had the conventional training for as a journalist or something, and I'm sure you're doing all the basics and all the boxes checked while approaching the victims, right? So there's a follow-up question on that. Also walk us through about having ethical consideration, because I mean I had interaction with many journalists and many freelance journalists. This is we call it here. Often apply these methods of ethical consideration while naming the victims, while approaching the victims. So also walk us through like quickly for about 1 or 2 minutes on how to do that if someone is not following that, and the importance of ethical consideration. I mean, since you carefully treated that victim of acid attack, and how you managed to protect her as well. So please.
So I'll just start from the story that I brought in the last question that I was answering about this survivor of acid attack. So now what happened is that it's a very interesting turn that that story took personally for me and also professionally for me. So I had the whole report going on, but I could not send it to any organization because of that ethical dilemma. I don't know um, whether to call it a professional ethical dilemma or personal, or an overlap of both. So I could not send that story because in my head I knew that this survivor, this one particular survivor, there were many survivors that I spoke to, but this young girl was very suffering and she was very determined to get her offender punished, and she was not able to do that. So the 2 months went in reaching out to lawyers, the local lawyers in Orissa who can maybe help her. Um, and suddenly one day, that girl's present partner, who was in Uttar Pradesh, the man that she was in love with or dating or had any kind of equation with, called me, and that man told me that he doesn't want the girl to report. It was his choice that he doesn't want the girl to remember her traumas, and he said that he doesn't want to invite problems into their life, like this lover or this companion or partner or whatever, and the victim, who is a girl and who is the survivor of a accident victim here. Um, and I did not know what to say. I could only tell him that. whatever I am doing is what she asks me to do. She asked me to reach out to lawyers, and she sent me all of her documents and the injury reports from the hospital and the disability certificate. So this is how we are working. There is nothing that I am imposing or forcing her to do. So maybe you can sit and talk with her. And he kept on insisting that I do not help her. And I did not know how to react because this was the first time I was in Bihar, and I was having this phone call with a boy or a man who was apparently saying that he was this girl. Let's assume her name is M's partner. Um, and after that phone call, I thought for a while, and then I just dropped a message to the survivor, whom we have apparently named M for the sake of this conversation. So I dropped a message to M, and she said that this boy from her phone took my phone number and gave me a call, and she wants to pursue this case. She's still determined to get her offender punished, and she doesn't want her case to be hanging in the Odisha court. And that was the last conversation that I had with her. She told me, Ki, Didi, you go on, you look for the lawyers and the help that you're looking for. And after that, um, 1 week post that, there is a lawyer that works for human rights issues and the Dalit rights. So he is a good acquaintance. I got in touch with him, and he said that he would help with some of his contacts in Odisha. And I messaged M, and she was off the radar. So since 6 months, every month I drop her a message asking how is she. And the last time I messaged her, I wrote that maybe we don't have to work forward on this report, but I cannot say that the consistent worry about her has not left me. So maybe one can also say that because reporters are also humans. So, and I do not believe in that idea that when you are professionally on the field, you have to be very professional and you have to cut off all the human emotions and the psychological emotions that you have towards the story that you are covering. We somewhat get attached, and especially when we are covering an issue that somewhat associates to our identities also, our lived experience also. We try to be as resourceful as we can be in the sense of being useful to the needs of this person. So that was the intent from where I was coming from. But then this person M, who is the survivor, is off the radar. So I'm just waiting. Maybe she is okay. I just want to understand that she is fine. Maybe because there is a huge probability of intimate partner violence also, because there was some conflict already going on between her then partner and herself regarding how she should go about this report that she wanted to do. So now with this story, because this was one of the very complex situation in terms of emotions and psychology that I was also a part of in the story of the survivor. Somehow I became a part of. So from here, I will walk to the ethical side. So we also have to understand that as journalists, we cannot become counselors because we also have our workload. We also have our professional boundaries also. So getting that kind of personal attachment with a person that we are interviewing, with a survivor, is one thing, but we also have to maintain a certain kind of professional boundary. So for example, when I'm getting a call from this partner of a survivor who wants something else to be done, who doesn't want the partner to be helped because eventually he has different point of view towards the situation that is there, I cannot have that phone call of trying to make him understand things that he should understand on his own. So we also have to understand that there are some things in people's life that maybe we have to keep a very respectful distance with, while also trying to be resourceful for the person. So there is a very thin line between that. Sometimes when we get too much engrossed or engaged in the story, this is a blurred line that we have to be very careful while tracing or walking on. Now to begin to the coming to the basics, like from the starting, when we are approaching a subject, we have to very well understand, especially if the person, not the subject rather, if the person we are interviewing is somebody who has a job in the informal sector. Like for example, the kinds of report that I do, I am not much interacting with the people who are in a very well paid upper middle class job setup. They're mostly in informal sector, or they are working laborers, or they are the victims of any kind of caste-based gendered violence. So in such cases, one has to be very thorough with the background that the person we are speaking to comes from. And when I say background, it also depends on what is the timing of their job. Like for example, if they're daily wage worker, the storyteller or the reporter or the journalist should very much keep that in mind, because we are doing our jobs, but the person that we are approaching for the story also has a job to do. So very often if we get into that conceptual headspace that maybe the work that we are doing is something we get very narrow viewed about that in that sense. So I guess that is one thing, to respect the timing of the person that we are speaking to, and not only to respect them when they are in a quote unquote respectful kind of job, but anyone that we are speaking to is as important to us as a storyteller, as a journalist, as a reporter. It is one thing. The second thing is to understand the emotion, the language, and the communication space that they're coming from. Because many times the people that we are speaking to, they might not be that much articulate about their personal stories and traumas. So as human, because we are mostly working with language concepts, so we don't tend to have that patience to let the other person speak. Most often I have seen my fellow colleagues and journalists do this, and especially men or a male assigned at birth, when they are reporting on gendered violence, they tend to interrupt the survivor very often, or they do not tend to have that patience to wait for the survivor to complete. Many times in the interview, there are points where the survivor would want to not speak about it. So that is very much I think it's very common sense and emotion driven approach also, to be sensitive towards that silence, or to be sensitive towards the other person's silent refusal to not speak on that particular issue in the moment. But then the second part of or the second picture or the second side of the same coin is, how do we then get the empirical data or the empirical knowledge that we are trying to get from the story. So I think for that, the process is that we can let the we can let the interviewer have their own time. We can come back to the same question maybe later that day, or maybe later some other day, or maybe we can just let them know ki this is something that we want you to speak on, but just let us know when you want to speak on. And sometimes the person will not want to speak on. Sometimes the person will forget that we had this conversation. So passing these small cues in the conversation, maybe keeping the ground reportings, and especially when you're talking about the reports that we do on the grassroots level, we cannot keep the whole structure of the question or the interview very rigid. It has to be a free flowing conversation. Third is to make the person comfortable. It's very important as a ground reporter to be a very good listener also, because until unless that kind of trust and confidence is not put into us by the person that we are speaking to, it is very difficult for them to open up. Also, while opening up, or in the process that they start to open up about their story towards us, it's also very important uh, to let them have those breathing gaps. Now this whole exercise might be sounding like we are not going towards the ethical side, while we are going towards more of a psychological side. But as I said, that I am not a journalist who is trained by books or institution, but I'm rather more trained in the 5 years of experience that I have on the ground. Um, and generally, even when we are not reporting, even when you are not a researcher, even when you are not performing a researcher, or even when I am not performing a journalist, we are humans and we are consuming different emotions and data and events from all the direction. So that has to train us, or that has to train our sensitivity as human beings, that we bring to any profession that we are into, as a researcher, as a journalist, as a advocacy person, whatever we are doing. So I think the whole template of what are the ethical considerations. Some templates are written, they're hard and fast rule. Every journalism book is going to tell us that. But some things we learn when we are on the ground. Some things we learn maybe from our own life experience, that how would I want to be treated if there is someone who wants to come and report my story. So I think these are some of the organic things, like Gramsci says, organic intellectuals who are mostly associated with the communities or the experiences that they come from. So I think the whole idea of organic ethical framework also has to be embedded in the process of journalism also. I hope I was able to answer. If I missed something, maybe bring me back to it.
No, thank you so much. You have answered it very professionally, and uh, I mean, you said it right. I mean, there are certain hard and fast rules that are written, that are there, but sometimes you have to think out of the box as well. And in a situation, there's a thin line between sympathy and empathy. So uh, there's that element of of uh, personal and emotional touch involves while reporting these issues. So thank you so much, Aishwarya. While addressing, because we've already taken up half an hour and two questions to the three, so I'll quickly move to another question that is again overlapping in that nature. So when addressing overlapping challenges related to caste, gender, and sexuality, what collaborative insights have emerged that strengthen community resilience, and in what ways can these lessons inform broader, more inclusive strategies? Since you told me that you rather focus on people who are working from informal sector, and I'm sure that there are a lot of stories and a lot of incidents emerged from that experience.
I'll try to quickly just come to the pointers and keep this one brief, keeping the timeline or the time frame in mind. Because I would also like to think about the theme or the theme of the podcast that we have today. How does caste and gender intersect, and how does it plays out in the media representation? And I would try to connect it to the question that you have put before me. So there was a report in 2019 that was done by Oxfam India, I think in collaboration with News Laundry, and then they did a report again in 2022. Now, both the reports tell that most of the people who are speaking these stories, who are journalists, who are storytellers, come from the Savarna background. That is what we call general, if we stick to the government given vocabulary in that sense. So then, if we speak about the caste, how government likes to see is general SC, ST, OBC. But then when we talk about conceptually, we mostly call it the oppressed caste and the oppressor caste, or the Savarna or the upper caste in that sense. So what I'm trying to say here is that 88% of the population, as 2019 report says, that it belongs to the non-OBC SC/ST category. Now, in the report that was again brought to the public knowledge in 2022 said that 86% of the population belongs to the non-OBC SC/ST category. Which means that there was not a much change in the scenario when it comes to the newsroom, when it comes to reporting, and when it comes to who is telling whose story. So that is one thing. And when we talk about informal sector, I have a data written down, so I'll just read it from here. That's 74%. So it's a e-shram data. It's a data that is given by the government only. That 74% of the people who are working in informal sector, like working as domestic workers, working in the construction side, all kinds of physical labor that is being done, which is very vulnerable in the sense of professional opportunity also, because there's no benefits in the sense of bonus or PF or contract based profession in that sense. So all of these population, these people who are not just data and have faces and have names, belong to OBC SC/ST communities. So they clubbed make 74% of the people in informal sector comes from OBC SC/ST communities. Many of them are women, many of them are migrant workers, many of them are women who do not have a very traditional biological family setup. For example, the husband might have died, or they might not be belonging to a family where there is a kind of male head caregiver kind of figure, and they themselves as migrant workers are surviving in a city that is different from their native state or native village or native town. So we have to understand that when we are talking about caste, representation and autonomy, not just representation on the face value, but representation and autonomy of decision making, of intervening the policy. This kind of disparity and huge gap exists in all kinds of spaces, be it the space of media, journalism, reporting, or be it the space of informal sector. Now, informal sector is a very vulnerable kind of space when it comes to professional security and benefits that is offered to the people who are in that sector. So we also understand that huge chunk of population and people come from, again, the OBC SC/ST community. Uh, Now, when we say informal sector, the thing that we mostly think of is that a journalist can maybe report on, say that there should be proper policies in place for their safety, for the sanitation on the workplace, for a proper wage and the proper delivery of wage. But since the question talks about the intersection of caste, gender, and sexuality, I will talk about this one report that I did under Ladli Media Fellowship. It was under 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So this fellowship was in the period of November and December in 2024. So what I found out in the ground report was that the rape laws in India that is mentioned in BNS, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. So now BNS is this body of documented law that has replaced IPC, the Indian Penal Code, which was formerly existing. Now BNS has a very clear defined section about what qualifies as rape and what are the laws around it. Now, this particular law assumes that somebody who would be raped or somebody who would be a victim to sexual violence is a woman, is a female assigned at birth. And when I say is a woman or is a female assigned at birth, it means they are a woman or a female on the government document. Now, how they identify as, what is their sexuality, what kind of sexual orientation they have, what kind of risks that they might be into because of their sexual orientation, plus their caste and class location. These intersections are totally overlooked when BNS says that in rape laws, the victim or the survivor would be a female or a woman, somebody who's a female or woman on the government document like Aadhaar, PAN card, etc., etc. Now it leaves out a huge group of people, and when the caste and class come into place, then it is leaving out a huge group of people who are not privileged to have their private life inside a very guarded kind of housing or a private kind of structure. For example, there's this one person who earlier used to do sex work. They were a sex worker. They also were begging for the basic survival to be met. Then they got married. Now they are running a shop. Now this person is again a male or a man in their government document. They come from a caste oppressed community. They come from a class that would not even qualify into the strata or the income of a middle class. And they are not a straight person. They had they are M2M, that is male having sex with man having sex with man, or male having sex with male. Uh, Now they are left in a very vulnerable position, and especially in sex work. When we talk about sex work, the trans people, or even women who are in sex work, mostly the data says that they come from class and caste marginalized communities. Now, for them to go to the police to report itself is a very big psychological hurdle, because they are not aware about what kind of response the police would give, what kind of policies are in place, especially in the areas where there is no government campaign or where there is no NGO working to make them aware of these existence of these laws. So that is the first hindrance. The second is, what kind of treatment would they get in the police station? Because there is a huge stigmatization against the queer communities, against the trans people, and there is a huge stigma against the people who come from the caste and class marginalized communities and are also queer, and maybe are also doing sex work, or maybe are also in the profession of begging. Now, sex work, begging, these are not some areas of profession that they had chosen for themselves. These were some profession that they were pushed to because of the circumstances and systemic inequalities. So now they're left in a position where they can be in risk of sexual violence, especially those who are involved in sex work. But there is no law to protect their sexual autonomy or their bodily autonomy, because they are still male on the government document, because there are many reasons that they would not want to have a identity card that says that they are trans, or suppose having that whole journey of coming to terms with one's gender identity itself is a very time taking process. So many people that I spoke to were like, they do not fit into these binaries of man and woman, but they don't want to have a government card that says that they're trans, because that is their journey to have. They don't want the state and the legal forces and the uh, all those kinds of institutional structures to intervene into their own journey with their gender and their sexuality and their sexual orientation. So now that is a very fair thing to say, but for those people, the state or the legal document leaves them very, very, very vulnerable, because now there are no rape laws to protect them. And we also have to understand how caste and class operates here, because the queer people who come from a privileged kind of space of caste and class, they can, there is of course a violence against all the queer and trans people, but their class and caste gives them certain space to negotiate the spaces of safety. But for the people who do not have those kinds of privileges, negotiating those spaces of safety or accessing those spaces of safety itself is something which is a very far-fetched dream. And again, I like to point this out, that the BNS or the rape laws leaves them vulnerable. So now rape law is just one example to understand how state treats the queer, caste and class marginalized people as citizens. They are not much worried about their citizens if they come from the intersections of these kinds of identities. So that is one example, and we can use the same lens to understand how it happens in different intersections of profession and other things.
Right. Thank you so much, Aishwarya. And I also apologize for not adding a lot of fillers. Since I've given you the platform to do the talking, so I hope you understand this. Since you've talked about a community that has been stigmatized for long, right? This brings to a question that is that leads us to a community. I want to say community to people who have been facing physical challenges and whatever challenges that hinders their progresses, right? So recognizing that physical impairments can intensify marginalization. It's a double double-edged sword, or it's a double whammy, I would say, for them, even for queer people as well. What creative methods have you observed that successfully elevate the voices of differently abled individuals, ensuring their unique struggles and strengths receive due attention in public discourse, and also talk us through people who are vulnerable physically from your community, from people from caste, gender, and OBCs.
So I would maybe begin with a story that is directly from my maternal village. So there is this one couple who are married, and they both are blind people. So what my maternal aunt mostly she tells me about the story that this woman cannot see; she is completely blind, and the husband is like partially blind. Maybe he can partially see, but not to a very functional level. In that sense, his sight is not that functional. And they're both married, and the family has just these two people. There are no children, no extended family, no in-laws. And what my maternal aunt tells me is that so they go to the work. They work in the fields. They are daily wage laborers. So they go to work together. They come back together. And according to my maternal aunt, this is a very ideal kind of family situation because they are companions in everything that they do. That is a very romantic kind of idea that my maternal aunt has about them. But this also makes me think about how in a social structure, in a society, we talk about or we think of the sexuality or the life of the people, of the persons with disabilities, especially physical and visible disabilities. We will come to the not so visible disabilities later, but maybe we can first talk about the visible and the physical disabilities in that sense. So most often the charity model is very much famous and very much embedded in the South Asian context when we even start to ponder about upon disability. So the first thing is that when we think of the word disability, there is a sense of othering, in the sense that maybe disability is a issue, quote unquote, or it's a problem that does not have to do with one's life. But we have to very much understand that disability is a discourse, is a concept, is an idea, is something that we should know, understand in the sense of empirical experience, in the sense of sensitivity, and in the sense of policy, because anyone at any point of time could become a person with disability because it could be due to accident, it could be due to a disease that is maybe genetic or non-genetic and is very slowly manifesting in our physical state. It could be due to old age. Very oftentimes, the people who are elderly in our houses, they start having problem with the sight or with the hearing thing, and they are not this their situation is not looked at in terms of how it relates to disability. They are mostly seen as key, since they are aging, they are having these kinds of physical problems. But then to put it in terms of disability, they are now persons with disability. So now what kind of societal or familial framework can we think of when we are talking about disability that comes to one due to age? So the age one is an example to understand that disability exists in all communities. It could come to us in any point of time, in any walk of time, and it is not something that one has to other while talking about disability or while conceptualizing or while interacting with the idea of disability. So that is one thing. Second is that uh, especially for access of education, and when we are talking about the persons with disability who are women, their sexual health, their reproductive health is something that is most often overlooked in the OBC, SC, ST, or the lower income bracket communities. Because things like sexual health, things like reproductive health, it needs lots of access to information from a very early age, because it starts from the what kind of nutrition that we take. Now the whole concept of nutrition is also depends on which community has access to what, how the access to hospital is being controlled by where we are born, what kind of money do we have, what kind of geography are we born in, even what religion are we born in the case where there is a lot of polarization around the identities and lots of violence around identities. So we have to understand that when we talk about sexual health, reproductive health, A, sexual health and reproductive health of a woman who is a person with disability, B, then A and B connects to many kinds of information access, many kinds of awareness access, and many kinds of access to these tablets and medicines and proper abortion and many things. Now, there are very small structural flaws. Like, for example, because I brought this word abortion, so there's just one thing I would like to talk about. If you look at the beds that are there in the hospital for the abortion beds or the general beds in the gynecologist department, those beds are made in a way that if a woman who is blind has to step on it to have an abortion, to have access to an abortion, the size of the bed, the height of the bed from the ground is very much physically inaccessible to a person who is a blind woman and who is maybe there to get abortion. So the small architectural things that exist in these kind of institutional spaces are itself not made in a way to be inclusive of the physically disabled bodies. And I'm only speaking about the physically and visible disability until now. That is one thing. And when we look at the communities that are already vulnerable, that are already marginalized, it is very difficult for them because of the multiple hindrances that are there. Then if we talk about the invisible disability that exists, let's say for example in Hindi, I think it might be a very colloquial thing to say across South Asia. In India also people say ki, this person is mad, he pagal hai. There's a very colloquial connotation that if one is not responding to the social situation in a certain way, they are looked at as a person who is slow, who is retarded, and all kinds of derogatory words is used towards them and begins from the family itself. Now we have to understand that the laws, policies, and the family and society as a structure, they both have impact on each other, because the value or the concept that is there, it reflects symbiotically in both of these institutions. So it's very interesting to understand that how these kinds of prejudices begins from the family and society itself. So mostly what we tend to have towards any kind of disability in South Asia is a charity model, that let's have this kind of provision for say a disabled student or a disabled person. We give them maybe this amount of money and this is how the education will go on. But we tend to forget that they also come from a certain gender, and there has to be issues related to their gender, to the type of body that they have, to the community that they come from, to the religion that they come from, and all of these is clubbed together with disability. So now if there is a policymaker or if there's a journalist who is reporting on disability, how that disability or the implications of the disability is magnified due to the other identities or the intersections that this person hold has to be also looked at. I will come back to, as I finish this answer, I will come back to the story that I was telling about this woman and her husband. Now, this woman and her husband live in a very small house. They do not own much land. They come from a small land holding OBC community. They mostly work as wage laborers in other people's land. So it might be a very egalitarian site to look at, two blind people going to field together, working together, coming back together. But one has to think that when they are sick, who is the caregiver? When they are sick, how are they accessing the transport? Because now they're living in a very outskirts or a rural area. How are they accessing the transport? If there is no family caregiver, what kind of provision does the panchayat level authorities have for the disabled citizens who live in that particular panchayat who do not have any kind of family support? So when we talk about disabilities, I think we should also start looking at the small incidents that is happening around us, and how the lack of a social model or a lack of a human rights model is something that should be taken into account instead of just a charity model in the sense of disability.
Thank you so much for such a detailed response, it brings us to another story. I was look it into our time constraints. I would perhaps put it for another conversation. For that, I'm skipping the digital media part question because we've talked about media a lot. So what I would do, I would request you to talk us through your current work in curriculum development and literacy activism. What role do educational projects play in reshaping societal narratives? And how might these grassroots efforts serve as a catalyst for enduring social progress?
Yes, so I'll just quickly walk you through this the curriculum building and the book building and the literacy activism, or maybe putting together the things that I have understood from journalism into the books that I am currently writing for the students of class 10th. Class 10th is a project that we are currently working on. So there's this NGO that works against child sexual abuse, and their model is to bring all the stakeholders together children, teachers, the non-teaching staff, the school administration. So they mostly work through the school. So there are presentations, there are seminars, there are workshops, there are books, there are resources, reading materials, visual, audio-visual materials, e-learning materials. So through all of these instruments and resources, what this organization does is that it tries to sensitize all the stakeholders in their own pace, with a specific treatment to everyone. Like, for example, how one would talk about sexual abuse to a child who is 13 would be different from how I would speak about the same to an adolescent who is, say, 17, would be different from how I would talk about it to a parent. Because especially in the societal acceptance level, it is very difficult in India for a parent to accept that the child who is their biological child has been abused, although these stories exist very much in the society. The data says that child sexual abuse is also not gendered. It happens to small boys and girls, and that this data of abuse is equally distributed. Now, it is very sad to talk about it in terms of data, because I'm very sure that everyone who is listening to this podcast, and if they are especially from some area of South Asia, they might know at least one person who was a survivor of child sexual abuse. Also, when I say abuse, let's not confuse abuse with rape, because any kind of breach of sexual autonomy can be quantified in the abuse laws. So the laws is the different everywhere. So, for example, in India, POSH also addresses showing any kind of pornographic material to a child who is a minor and who is below 18. So there are different acts. If we go into the legal terminologies, there are different minute details that exist. But in a broader structure, what this NGO does is that we talk about all those things to all the stakeholders. And my role currently is to develop a book that would be distributed across more than 25 states of CBSE and ICC schools, wherever this NGO program is implemented. And through every chapter, we are trying to talk about a concept that is difficult for us as adults also to think about. Like, for example, when we talk about gender, that gender is not two binaries, it's not two different color boxes, it's something that is fluid. How do we talk about these concepts to a child who is just in class 10? How do we talk about these concepts to a child who comes from a societal structure where all media, entertainment, family structures that we have witnessed is heteronormative, is a male body and a female body? So how do we not just conceptually break into the thought process of the children who are reading the book, but also bring them to some kind of reading exercises, some kind of resources for them to watch, some kind of group activities for them to do, that helps them question those things, not while reading that chapter, but leaves that thought in them while they are growing as an adult. So another chapter is a chapter where we are talking about how constitutional morality is something that will uphold across all kinds of morality. Now, when I'm writing this chapter as a journalist, my head, or the voice in my head, is that when the Indian Constitution was being made, there were many organizations, many groups, especially the Hindutva or the Hindu ideology holding groups, who did not want a constitution. Coming back to the theme, the caste, gender, and media, who wanted law of the land that was based in this regressive book called Manusmriti. But then we had Baba Saheb, who was against all of these kind of regressive thoughts and tirelessly worked and fought to have the constitution in place. But then this is a very complex story, and are the students of class 10th ready to be engaged in this kind of conversation? Especially, there are different kinds of schools. Some of these schools are the schools in areas where lower middle class population or the demographic resides. Some of these schools are in areas, posh areas of New Delhi or any other metro cities. And these books would be equally distributed in all those kinds of spaces, in all different sorts of schools. So as a person who is, or as a writer who is making these books, I also feel kind of freedom to bring different kinds of questions. Like, for example, a very interesting question that I would like to share is that in one of the workbooks, there's a question where I have put an exercise where the child has to answer. Now, the question goes like this: if you come from a community where your ancestors have in any way discriminated against the ancestors of your friends, would that affect the relationship that you have today with your friend or with your classmate in today's time? So now the question goes like this. So for example, when we are talking about caste and gender, it becomes very easy to talk about these topics in research spaces or in journalistic spaces or in spaces where we talk about concepts and we know that everyone is hands on. But to talk about it to a child, and the child could be from any section of the community. They could be from a community that is a oppressor caste or class or religion. They could be from the other side of the coin as well. So how to situate the knowledge system that it caters to all the kinds of readers in that age group, keeping all these intersections in mind, is something that I find very interesting because it is little different from the journalistic work that I do. Um, and it is a kind of exercise where you read a lot, but you try to find a channel to put it in a way that it is easy and understandable, but at the same time um, keeps the facts intact for somebody who is in that particular age group. Yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aishwarya, and I would love to have a copy of that, textbook as well, in the meanwhile. So it must have been, really inspiring for your students and how they're responding as well. I mean, in terms of quickly feedback or something.
So currently, I am still in the process of bringing that book together. Once all the chapters that has to be there is there, then we would be circulating those to the advocacy department or the advocacy members of this particular NGO, because advocacy members are directly in contact with the schools and the students. And then we would be doing a testing, sending out these books to the teachers and the students for a reading. So that process is still to come. Abhi, we are still in the process of putting the content and putting the facts and the chapters and the research together in the form of a book, to say that way.
All right. Good luck with that. Moving forward, we would be concluding our today's discussion. It was a pleasure having you as we wrap up this powerful conversation. It's clear that storytelling is not just a tool for documenting reality, it's a force for change. Aishwarya, your work continues to challenge dominant narratives and create space for voices that have long been marginalized. We've talked about especially the queer and the people with physical challenges. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, insights, and the vision that fuels your work. To our listeners who are watching or listening us, our discussion basically resonated with your. If our discussion resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. I would also request and recommend to follow Aishwarya Lot's work, engage with anti-caste feminist literature, and support advocacy journalism that holds the system accountable. Last message for like 30 seconds, please, for our viewers.
Yes. So, as we were speaking about that, invisible disabilities is something that exists. So, that is something that has existed throughout our conversation. So, I will just wrap up the last. Um, I don't know what to say as the last sentence, but I would just like to put it out there that if you want to pursue journalism, story writing, storytelling, one has to understand that all of these comes with a sense of responsibility, and to the fellow colleagues that it is not just sufficient to look at ourselves as journalists or storytellers who are documenting stories, but to also look at our own political situatedness as people in the story that we are reporting, in the political scenario that we are currently based in, and also to be in touch with the stories, to be in touch with the labor organizations, to be in touch with the different civil rights society, to be in touch with the different kinds of organizations that are continuously working for for the rights and the voices of the people from the affected community. These organizations which are run by people from the affected communities. That is how we can build an ecosystem and not just be associated to a community for the sake of one story. Yeah, that is it.
So until next time, keep questioning, keep challenging, and keep pushing for a just world. Thank you.